The storm came without warning. One moment, the alien settlement was quiet. Just the sound of wind moving between the tall ice structures, and the next, the sky turned into a wall of white. Snow swirled in every direction, the cold so sharp it stung like glass on skin. Doors slammed shut, windows sealed. And the streets emptied in seconds. Everyone knew what to do when a storm like this hit: stay inside. Wait it out and let whatever was caught outside be taken by the cold. Yarrick stood near the edge of the market square, his hands full of trade goods. When he heard it, a faint sound, almost lost in the roar of the wind. At first, he thought it was the storm itself, but then he heard it again. A thin, sharp cry, high-pitched. Frightened and desperate, it came from somewhere beyond the settlement wall. Out in the white, he turned to the nearest alien merchant. A tall man with frost on his shoulders. "Someone's out there," Yarrick shouted over the wind. The man only looked away and shook his head. "It is not our way," he said. "The storm takes who it takes." Yarrick's jaw tightened. He looked around. Everyone had heard it. Some shifted uncomfortably, but none moved. The cry came again. Weaker this time, Yarrick dropped the bundle of goods to the ground. "Not our way?" He muttered under his breath. "Then maybe your way is wrong." He pulled his cloak tighter around himself. It was made for human winters. Not this. The fabric already felt thin, the wind slipping through it like knives. Still, he headed toward the gate. Two alien guards stood there, their faces hidden behind frost masks. "You go out, you die," one warned. "Maybe," Yarrick said, "but I'm not letting a kid freeze to death because you're afraid to care." The gate opened only wide enough for him to slip through. Then it slammed shut behind him. The sound of the settlement vanished, replaced by the endless scream of the storm. Snow whipped into his face, stealing his breath. He bent his head low, moving forward step by step. The cold sank deep, biting at his fingers, even through his gloves. He tried to follow the sound of the cry, but the wind made it twist and change. One moment it was to his left, then it seemed far ahead. He cursed under his breath and kept moving. His boots sank deep into the snow with each step. Sometimes he hit hidden ice and almost fell. The world was nothing but white sky and ground blending together until he couldn't tell them apart. Then, through the haze, he saw something, a flicker of movement low to the ground. He stumbled forward, nearly falling into a drift. There, half buried in snow, was a small shape, a child curled up on her side, a thin layer of frost clinging to her dark hair. Her skin had a faint silver hue, her small hands clutching something. A broken doll, her lips were blue, her eyes half closed, but when she saw him, she made a weak sound. Yarrick dropped to his knees, brushing the snow away from her face. "You're gonna be all right," he said softly, though he wasn't sure. She could understand. He took off his cloak and wrapped it around her, pulling her against his chest. She was light, frighteningly light, and her body was ice cold. She whispered something in her language. He didn't know the words, but the fear in her voice was clear. "Hold on," he told her. "I've got you." The wind howled louder, carrying strange noises through the snow. Yarrick turned his head movement again, farther out, dark shapes shifting in the white, watching. His stomach tightened. Whatever they weren't here to help. He adjusted his grip on the girl and started back toward the settlement. Each step was harder than the last. The storm seemed determined to push him back. Snow clung to his hair. His gloves were wet and stiff, his legs aching with the effort. But every time he thought about stopping, he felt the girl shiver against him. She was alive for now, and as long as she was alive, he wouldn't stop walking. The settlement walls were nowhere in sight. The white had swallowed everything. Yarrick could feel his own strength draining. He leaned forward, pushing through the wind. Somewhere behind him, a low growl rolled through the storm. He didn't look back. He just tightened his hold on the child and kept going, because he had already decided no matter what waited in the snow, he wasn't leaving her behind. The storm was a living thing. It pressed against Yarrick from all sides, pulling at his legs, clawing at his face. Every breath felt sharp, like swallowing broken ice. The girl's small body was so cold, it felt like holding a piece of the storm itself. He kept her wrapped inside his cloak. One arm under her legs, the other across her back. Her head rested against his chest, and every now and then, he felt a faint tremor, proof she was still alive. The settlement was somewhere behind him now, hidden in the wall of white. He couldn't see the lights, couldn't hear the sound of gates or voices, only the endless roar of wind and the crunch of snow under his boots somewhere far off. Another low growl echoed through the storm. He didn't know what kind of animal it belonged to, but the sound made the hairs on his neck rise. Yarrick had been in bad weather before. Sandstorms on Zarin, acid rain on Talos 4. But this storm felt different. It wasn't just nature. It was like the world itself wanted to erase anything caught in it. His mind kept replaying the image of the settlement's people turning away. How could they just let a child die? The thought burned hotter than the cold biting into him. The ground shifted under his boots. At first, he thought it was just deep snow. But then he realized he was crossing a frozen stream. The ice groaned beneath him. Carefully, he stepped across. Testing each move, the girl whimpered at the sound, her tiny fingers clutching his shirt. "It's okay," he said softly, though he wasn't sure it was true. Once across, he kept moving, but the wind was relentless. It pushed from the side now, forcing him to lean into it. Snow collected on his lashes until his vision blurred. He wiped it away and squinted ahead. Through the white, he thought he saw movement, not animal shapes this time, but something. Still, a dark lump half covered by snow. He approached cautiously. It was a signpost, cracked, bent, the alien writing almost worn away. He didn't know what it said, but it told him one thing. He was farther from the settlement than he thought. He turned, trying to find any landmark to guide him, but the storm had swallowed them all. His compass flickered in his glove, the needle spinning uselessly. Something howled again, closer this time. It was joined by another. Predators, definitely. Hunting Yarrick's grip on the girl tightened. If they caught his scent in this wind, they'd follow until they got close enough to strike. He forced his legs to move faster. Each step felt like lifting lead. The snow was deeper now, halfway to his knees in places. The girl's breathing was shallow against his chest. He knew she wouldn't last long without shelter, and neither would he. Then, through a break in the swirling white, he saw it a shadowed rise in the snow. At first, he thought it was another drift. But as he got closer, he saw dark rock beneath the ice. It was an outcrop, maybe even a cave. The wind shoved him forward, like it wanted him to reach it. Or maybe that was just his mind willing it to be closer. When he reached the base, the rock wall rose above him, smooth and black against the storm. He circled until he found a hollow, shallow, but enough to block the wind. He ducked inside, pressing his back against the cold stone. The girl stirred weakly in his arms, her eyes flickering open just a little. They were silver, just like her skin. She said something again, the same word she had whispered before. He still didn't understand it, but it sounded like a name. Yarrick set her down carefully, keeping her wrapped in his cloak. His fingers were stiff, but he pulled out a heat flare from his belt pouch. It hissed, too, life filling the hollow with a dim, flickering orange glow. Warmth began to spread, slow but steady. The girl's breathing eased slightly, her eyelids fluttering. She was still alive, but the cold had sunk deep into her bones. Outside, the howls grew louder. Shadows moved just beyond the snow, circling. Yarrick reached for the plasma cutter at his hip. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it could burn through steel, maybe enough to scare off whatever was out there. He checked his energy cell, nearly full. That was something, at least. The girl reached for him suddenly. Her small hand gripped his wrist, her silver eyes wide. She pointed toward the storm outside. Yarrick frowned. "What is it?" he asked. She whispered again, shivering, then, as if to answer him. A new shadow appeared in the white, taller than the others, moving fast toward them. The tall shadow moved through the storm like it belonged there. Was not fast, but it was steady, cutting through the swirling snow without stumbling. Yarrick's grip tightened on the plasma cutter. The girl's eyes stayed fixed on the shape. Wide and unblinking, she whispered that same word again, the one she had repeated since he found her. Her voice was weak, but urgent. The wind pushed the figure closer until Yarrick could make out its form. It was no predator. It was a person, tall, wrapped in heavy furs, carrying a long staff tipped with metal. The face was hidden beneath a hood, snow crusting the edges. When the figure stopped at the mouth of the hollow, Yarrick stepped forward, just enough to block the girl from sight. The hood tilted, and a woman's voice, sharp but trembling, cut through the storm. "You?" she said in accented common. "You have my child." Yarrick blinked. Her child. The girl behind him let out a weak sound, half a cry, half a gasp. He stepped aside, and the woman moved quickly. Dropping to her knees in the snow, she gathered the girl into her arms, holding her so tightly it was as if she thought she might vanish. The child clung to her mother's thick cloak, burying her face in it. The woman's gloved hand brushed over the girl's silver hair. She spoke softly, in their language, her voice breaking. Yarrick could not understand the words, but he knew the tone, relief mixed with fear. It was the sound of someone who thought they had lost everything. "You went out into the storm for her," the woman said finally, looking up at him. Yarrick shrugged, though his legs still shook from the cold. "Someone had to," he replied. Her silver eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something like disbelief. "My people. They do not," she said slowly. "It is our way to let the storm choose." "I saw," Yarrick said, his voice low, "and I think your way is wrong." The woman flinched slightly, but she did not argue. Instead, she reached into her belt pouch and pulled out a small metal sphere. She pressed it into Yarrick's hand. "It will lead you back to the walls," she said. "The predators will not come close to its light." Yarrick turned it over in his palm, the surface smooth and warm despite the freezing air. He could see faint lines pulsing across it. Like veins of light, the girl shifted in her mother's arms, looking at Yarrick. Her silver eyes were brighter now, though still shadowed with exhaustion. She whispered something again, this time a different word. The woman's breath caught. "She calls you Savior," she said quietly. "That is a name given rarely among us." Before Yarrick could respond, a distant howl split the air, followed by another, closer. The woman looked toward the sound, her grip tightening on the girl. "They are hunting the warmth," she said. "We must go now." Yarrick nodded and stepped out of the hollow, the wind slamming into him again. The woman followed, the girl cradled close to her chest. The sphere in Yarrick's hand pulsed brighter, sending out faint ripples of light across the snow. The shapes in the distance stopped moving, as if the glow was a wall they could not pass. Still, their eyes gleamed from the edges of the storm, watching. Yarrick kept his steps steady, focusing on the dim path the sphere seemed to create through the white. The settlement might be close or still far. There was no way to tell in the blizzard. The girl's head rested on her mother's shoulder, but she kept looking back at Yarrick. It was not fear anymore, but something else, a kind of quiet trust. That look hit him harder than the cold. He had not come to this planet to be anyone's hero. He was just a trader, passing through, but now, with the snow all around, and danger at every edge, The thought of leaving her to die seemed impossible to understand. The light from the sphere flickered once, and the woman's pace quickened. "We are close," she said. Through the white, Yarrick finally saw it, faint shadows of the settlements. Tall ice walls. The gates loomed ahead, guarded by two figures half hidden in snow. When they saw the woman carrying the child, one guard's shoulders stiffened. Yarrick could not hear what they said over the wind, but he saw the hesitation in their movements. The gates opened just enough for them to pass through. Warmth rushed over them, not heat, but the difference between killing cold and the shelter. Of the walls, the woman did not slow until they were inside a narrow street. Out of sight of the main square, there, she stopped, turning to Yarrick. "You went where no one would go," she said. "And for that, I owe you more than I can give." Yarrick looked at the girl again, her silver eyes meeting his. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Just don't let your way take her from you again." The woman's breath shuddered, but she nodded. The girl reached out a hand toward Yarrick, small fingers curling as if to hold his. He took it gently, feeling the faint warmth returning to her skin. For the first time since the storm began, Yarrick felt a strange kind of warmth in his own chest. The gates had closed behind them. But the storm's voice still echoed through the narrow streets. Snow clung to Yarrick's hair and cloak, dripping onto the stone beneath his boots. The alien woman held her daughter close, the girl's silver eyes still fixed on him for a moment. It felt like the danger was over, but the woman's gaze kept darting toward the walls. As if listening for something, "They followed us," she said quietly. Yarrick frowned. "The predators." She nodded, her grip on the child tightening. "They do not give up easily. Not when they have caught the scent." Her voice was low, almost trembling. "And the storm gives them cover." Yarrick glanced back toward the gates. He thought of the glowing eyes and the white, the way they had circled, testing the edge of the light from the sphere. If they were smart enough to track, they were smart enough to wait. "How many are there?" he asked. "4, she said. "Maybe 5. Her eyes flicked toward the rooftops. "They will find a way inside if they can." The settlement streets were empty. The storm had driven everyone indoors. The only sounds were the wind's roar and the faint creak of ice shifting on the walls. Yarrick followed the woman through winding alleys until they reached a small stone dwelling built into the side of a larger structure. Inside, it was dim, lit only by a single hanging lantern. The warmth here was weak, but enough to stop the deep ache in Yarrick's bones. The woman set the girl down on a low bed made of woven hides. The child's eyes drifted shut almost immediately, exhaustion finally pulling her under. Yarrick kept his voice low. "Do these things attack often?" She nodded. "When the storms come, they roam closer to the walls. Sometimes they take the weak." The slow, her eyes darkened. "Sometimes even the strong." Before Yarrick could respond, a sound reached them, faint but sharp, a scrape. Like claws on stone, the woman's head snapped toward the door. "They're here," she whispered. Yarrick moved quickly, checking the charge on his plasma cutter. It wasn't a weapon made for long fights, but in close quarters, it could make any creature think twice. The woman pulled a short-bladed spear from the wall, the metal tip catching the lantern light. She moved to the window slit and peered out into the snow-filled street. Her breath misted in the cold air seeping through the cracks. Something moved outside, a shadow against the white, tall and bent. Fur bristling along its back, its head turned toward the house, and Yarrick saw a flash of yellow eyes before it vanished into the storm again. Another scrape came, this time from the roof. The woman cursed under her breath. "They're trying to find a weak spot," she said. Yarrick's muscles tightened. He remembered the growls in the storm, the slow circling. These creatures weren't just hunting for food. They were testing their prey. "They're smart," he said. "Yes," the woman replied. Grimly, "too smart." A thump shook the roof, followed by a low, rumbling growl. Snow fell from the ceiling in small drifts. Yarrick stepped toward the center of the room, ready to fire the plasma cutter if the roof gave way. Another shadow crossed the window slit, and this time it didn't pass. It stopped, pressing its face. Close to the opening, Yarrick caught the glint of teeth before the woman lunged. Stabbing her spear through the gap, a snarl split the air, the creature jerking back and vanishing into the storm. But the silence that followed was worse. The woman's eyes flicked toward the door. "They'll try again," she said. Maybe all at once. Yarrick scanned the room quickly. One entrance, one window slit, and a roof made of thick stone slabs, covered in ice. If they came through the front, they'd bottleneck. If they came through the roof, he'd have to hope the stone held. He positioned himself near the door, every muscle tense. The woman stood at his side, spear ready. The child slept on. Unaware of the danger crouching just beyond the walls, the first impact came hard. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Snow sifted through the cracks. The wood groaning. Another hit followed. And this time, a deep growl came with it. The woman's knuckles whitened on her spear. Yarrick's thumb hovered over the plasma cutter's trigger. A third blow split the doorframe slightly, enough for a thin sliver of white to show through. Then the growls rose in unison, a chorus of hunger. The predators had decided it was time. The door shook again, harder than before. Dust and snow drifted down from the ceiling with each hit. Yarrick could feel the force through the stone floor, like the creatures were trying to hammer the whole building apart. The woman's eyes never left the door, her spear tip steady. "They will not stop until one of us is dead," she said quietly. The third blow split the wood further, and a sharp claw pushed through the gap, scraping against the frame. Yarrick didn't wait. He stepped forward and jammed the plasma cutter into the gap, triggering a burst of bright blue heat. The air filled with the sharp smell of burning fur, and a howl ripped through the storm outside. The claw vanished, and the pounding stopped for a moment. The silence was heavy. Even the wind seemed to pause. Yarrick kept his weapon up. Okay. But his eyes shifted to the roof. "They're not done," he said. The woman nodded grimly. "They're thinking." A sound came from above, the crunch of snow under heavy weight. Then another from the side wall. Yarrick's stomach dropped. "They're trying every wall," he said. "Yes." The woman replied, her voice tight. "That is why we built in stone." She motioned for him to follow and crossed to the back of the small home. There, hidden behind a hanging cloth, was a narrow tunnel carved into the rock itself. "This leads deeper," she said. "There are places they cannot reach." Yarrick didn't argue. He lifted the sleeping child into his arms, the heat from the small body giving him a strange surge of strength. The girl murmured in her sleep, but did not wake. The tunnel was dark, the walls close enough that Yarrick's shoulders brushed them. The air was warmer here, less touched by the cold outside. Their footsteps echoed faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the stone. The woman moved ahead, her spear still in hand. Behind them, the sound of claws on stone grew louder. The predators had found the outer wall, and now they were testing it. The passage opened into a wider chamber, a natural hollow in the rock. It was lit by faint blue crystals growing from the walls, their glow soft and cold. A small fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by flat stones for sitting. The woman gestured for Yarrick to set the girl down on one of the hides. "She will be safe here," she said. For now, Yarrick crouched beside the child, adjusting the cloak around her. Her breathing was steady, though her skin was still pale from the cold. He looked at the woman. "How deep does this go?" "Far," she said. "These caves have been here longer than the settlement. Longer than our memory." She paused, her eyes moving to the shadows in the far corner. "They say the first people hid here from the storms and the beasts." "Ah." distant thud echoed through the rock. The sound was faint, but enough to make both of them tense. "They're looking for a way in," Yarrick said. The woman nodded. "They will not find it easily. But they are patient." The woman moved to a small alcove carved into the wall and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were dried food strips and a water skin. She handed them to Yarrick. "Eat, drink, keep your strength," Yarrick accepted. Them, though he only took a small sip, his eyes kept drifting toward the tunnel they had come from. Every few moments he thought he heard movement, a scrape, a faint growl, the sound of breath just out of sight. The woman sat across from him. The spear laid across her knees. Her gaze was sharp. But there was something else there now. Curiosity, maybe even respect. "You are not from here." She said. "No," Yarrick replied. "Just passing through." "Then why?" she asked, her voice soft but pointed. "Why risk your life for a child, not your own?" Yarrick looked at the girl sleeping beside him, because no one else did. He said simply. The woman studied him for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "My name is Sira," she said, "and hers is Alara." Yarrick nodded in return. Yarrick. Sira's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but close. "She will remember your name," she said, "even if my people will not." Another deep thud rolled through the stone, closer this time. Yarrick's head turned sharply toward the tunnel. The blue crystal light caught a flicker of movement in the shadows. Sira was already standing, spear in hand. "They have found a way down," she said, her voice low. "And now we hold this place." Yarrick rose. Plasma cutter ready. The chamber felt smaller now. The glow of the crystals casting long, sharp shadows. The sound of claws scraping against stone filled the air. Somewhere in the darkness of the tunnel, yellow eyes appeared. One pair, then two, then more. The predators had come into the shelter. Of stone, the predator's yellow eyes glowed in the tunnel's darkness. Yarrick's grip on the plasma cutter tightened, the heat humming against his palm. Sarah stood beside him, her spear ready, the tip gleaming faintly in the blue crystal light. Behind them, Alara stirred in her sleep, unaware that death had crept so close. The first beast stepped forward, its body low to the ground, fur bristling, its long snout wrinkled, revealing sharp teeth as it sniffed the air. The sound of its claws clicking on stone echoed through the chamber. Another beast moved beside it, slightly larger, its eyes fixed on Yarrick. They were slow now, careful, as if testing how far they could push. Yarrick took a step forward, raising the plasma cutter. The beasts froze. Ears twitching, he triggered a short burst, the blue flame lighting the tunnel walls. The hiss of heat filled the space, and for a moment, the predators backed up. But then a sound rose from deeper in the cave, a howl. Long and commanding, the smaller beasts moved aside, and another shape stepped into view. It was larger than the others, its fur streaked with scars. Its eyes glowed brighter, and its shoulders were thick with muscle. This was the Alpha. It stared at Yarrick without fear, as if it knew the human's weapon had limits. The air grew heavier, every breath tight in Yarrick's chest. Then, from behind them, a new sound came: footsteps, fast and purposeful. Yarrick turned his head slightly, his heart skipping. From the shadows of a deeper passage, another figure appeared. She was tall, wrapped in thick furs, her face bare despite the cold, silver eyes locked on the child, Alara. Her voice rang out, filled with desperation and relief. The girl's eyes snapped open, and she sat up suddenly. "Mother?" she cried, her small voice breaking. The woman, older than Sira, her features sharper, rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the child. She gathered Alara into her arms, holding her so tightly the girl whimpered. Her voice shook as she spoke in their language, words tumbling out too quickly for Yarrick to understand. Syrah's eyes widened. "Hi, matron," she whispered. Lowering her spear, the older woman looked up at Yarrick. Her expression fierce. "You kept her alive," she said in accented common. Yarrick nodded slightly, still keeping his plasma cutter aimed at the tunnel where the beasts waited. "Wasn't about to let her freeze," he said. The Alpha growled low, taking a step closer. The High Matron rose, still holding Ilara, and stepped toward the beasts. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the crystal light. She spoke a sharp string of words in her own language, her voice deep and commanding. To Yarrick's surprise, the Alpha paused, its head tilting as if it understood. It growled again, but softer. Before turning away, the other beasts followed, their eyes fading into the dark until the tunnel was empty. Yarrick lowered his weapon, the tension leaving his muscles all at once. Syrah exhaled slowly, her grip on the spear loosening. The High Matron turned back to him, her gaze steady. "You risked your life in the storm," she said. "You fought off the hunters." "For a child not your own, she's just a kid," Yarrick replied. Didn't seem like much of a choice. The High Matron studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she knelt and placed her hand on his shoulder. "In our ways, this is more than kindness," she said. "This is a bond, one we do not forget." Her eyes shifted toward Syrah. "And you? You stood with him?" Syrah bowed her head slightly. Though her eyes flicked toward Yarrick in quiet acknowledgement, Ilara tugged at her mother's cloak. Pointing at Yarrick, she spoke a few words, her tone soft but certain. The High Matron's lips curved faintly. "She calls you the one who came back," she said. "A name of honor among our people." Yarrick didn't know what to say to that, so he just gave a small shrug. "Guess I'll take it," he said. The High Matron looked toward the tunnel where the beasts had gone. "They will not return tonight," she said. "But the storm is not yet done. We stay here until dawn." Yarrick glanced toward the sleeping hides, his body aching from the cold and the strain. The warmth from the crystals wasn't much, but it felt like heaven compared to the storm outside. Syrah moved to tend the fire pit, small flames flickering to life. The shadows danced on the stone walls, chasing away the last trace of the predator's glow. Yarrick sat down against the wall, his weapon resting across his knees. Yara peeked out from her mother's cloak, her silver eyes catching the light. For the first time since he'd found her in the snow, there was no fear there, only something brighter, trust. And in that moment, Yarrick realized something. He had come into this storm as a stranger, but he might not leave as one. Dawn came slowly. The storm's howl faded into a distant hum, the heavy snow no longer battering the stone walls inside the shelter. The fire pit's glow cast soft light over the sleeping figures. Syrah rested with her spear still in hand, her head bowed. The High Matron sat with Ilara, curled safely in her lap. Yarrick remained near the tunnel entrance, his plasma cutter across his knees, his eyes half closed, but still alert when the first thin beam of daylight touched the blue crystals. The High Matron spoke. "It is time," she said softly. Her voice carried both relief and caution. The predators were gone, but the snow outside would be deep. Travel back to the settlement would not be easy. Yarrick rose, his muscles stiff from hours of cold stone beneath him. He stepped toward Ilara, who was just waking. She blinked up at him, her silver eyes bright despite the weariness in her small body. "Ready to go home?" he asked gently. She nodded, clutching her broken doll in one hand. The High Matron led the way, Syrah following close behind. Yarrick walked beside them. Kea larked beside them as if to make sure he was still there. The tunnels twisted upward, the air growing colder with each step. Finally, they reached the outer passage, and the white glare of the world beyond filled their eyes. The settlement walls stood in the distance, their sharp peaks coated in fresh snow. The path was uneven, The drifts deep enough to swallow a person to the waist. But the High Matron moved with sure steps. Her presence seemed to keep the predators at bay. Every so often, Yarrick caught a flicker of movement far away, but nothing came close. When they reached the gates, the guards stared in shock. One called out in disbelief, "The child lives." The gates opened slowly, and the people gathered. Murmurs spreading through the crowd. Some looked at Yarrick with confusion. Others with something sharper, suspicion, maybe even anger. He could hear fragments of their whispers. He broke the law. He defied the storm's will, but he also heard another voice. Softer yet stronger, he saved her. The High Matron stepped forward, her voice rising over the murmurs. This human walked into the storm when all of you turned away, she said. He faced the hunters, the cold, and death itself. Not for reward, but because it was right. Her words cut through the crowd like a blade. Some lowered their eyes. Others exchanged uneasy glances. Kella clung to her mother's side, but when she looked at Yarrick, she smiled, small but real, Sira. Moved to stand beside him, she speaks truth. She said to the crowd, "I was there. And I tell you this, had he not gone, she would be gone forever." Silence followed her words. The snow crunched underfoot as the High Matron walked to Yarrick and placed her hand on his arm. "In our law, there is debt for such an act," she said, "but I do not offer you gold or goods." She looked at Alara, then back at him. "I offer you our bond, the bond of kinship." Yarrick hesitated, unsure what that meant in their culture. The High Matron's expression softened slightly. "It means that no matter where you go, you are one of us. And she glanced at Alara, will always be your family." The words hit harder than he expected. He had never thought of himself as someone who belonged anywhere, but here, in this frozen place, among strangers. A child's trust had given him something different. He knelt so he was level with Alara. Her silver eyes sparkled in the pale morning light. "You stay warm from now on, all right," he said softly. She nodded and placed her tiny hand in his. "You came back," she whispered. "Always," he said, his voice steady. The crowd began to disperse, some still whispering, some watching in silence. Sira touched his shoulder as she passed, a small sign of respect. The High Matron led Alara toward their home. But the girl kept glancing back at him until they disappeared from sight. Yarrick stood in the snow, the storm finally gone. He knew he could leave now, return to his ship, move on to the next job, the next world. But as he looked at the settlement's walls, he realized something. Some bonds weren't meant to be broken, and no matter where he went, he would carry the memory of a cry in the snow, and the silver-eyed child who made him stay.